Good morning, everyone. Today, we'll be going through the short response questions 1 to 3 of your inflation topic. Okay, so as we go along, I expect everyone to take notes. All right, I'll be checking in the next class. I expect you to write at least 3 pages worth of notes. All right, on short response questions 1 to 3. Okay, based on the answers that I'm going to provide. I will check all these notes that you have written based on the video during the next class. All right? Okay, so I'm going to start now. On the first question, what do you understand by the concept of inflation? Okay, for deflation, I don't want to talk about it now. All right, the more important thing is inflation. We'll just focus on that for now. Okay, ignore the page numbers because they might be different from yours. All right, so what exactly is the meaning of inflation? Inflation can be defined as a situation in which there's a sustained increase in the general price level. Okay? Other than what you see on the slides, I expect you to also write down what I say verbally. All right? So the word sustain actually means continuous. Okay, that means there's a continuous increase in the price levels in the economy. All right, not just the price for cars, not just the price for oil or guns or just another good in particular, but in general prices have increased, and that's what we call inflation. Okay, it's not just the price of one particular good, but the average price level in general. Okay, all right, so take all these things down. Okay, what happens when there is inflation? Now, why is low inflation a macro goal of the government? Why is everyone, including your parents, okay, why are we so afraid of high inflation when the prices go up very fast? Why? Because if there's high inflation where the prices go up by, let's say, 10% every year, it would mean that we are able to buy fewer goods and services compared to before with the same amount of money. All right, let's say last time, okay, your $1,000 could buy a computer, right? But now that same amount of $1,000 after high inflation can no longer buy a computer because the price of the computer has risen, for example. All right, so you're able to buy less goods and services, and therefore the purchasing power of consumers will fall. Okay, let me explain this part again. Because with inflation, prices will increase, right? Which means that one is able to buy less goods and services as compared to before. Assuming that your income remains constant, you'll be able to buy less goods and services as compared to before. Which means that your purchasing power, the purchasing power of consumers will fall. And that's why we are so afraid of inflation, okay? Now, let me give you an example, okay? A brief example is that, for example, if I have $1 million, it could mean that I can buy a house, right? But let's say with inflation, where in general prices have increased, including the price of housing. Let's say it no longer costs $1 million, now it costs $2 million. All right, with inflation, now houses cost $2 million, but you still only have $1 million. It means that now you no longer are able to afford the house because your purchasing power has fallen, right? You only have $1 million, which is the same as just now, but the price of houses has increased to $2 million, which means that now you're no longer able to afford the house. Your purchasing power has fallen. All right? Next, okay, I go back, all right, to the question, the short response question. on how is inflation rate measured, okay? And for the inflation rate, we really need to consider the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, okay? And I'll show you an illustration of it later. Don't worry too much about the definition here. Just read through. It measures the cost of purchasing a basket of goods and services by a typical household during a time period relative, which means compared to the cost of the same basket during a base year. It is a weighted index. All right. Okay, I'll show you an illustration later, but just to let you know that a base year could be any year that we use to compare. For example, we may say that we let 2010 be the base year. Okay, and we'll give it a CPI of 100. Okay, so I repeat that usually in the base year, the CPI, we will give it the figure of 100. Why 100, you may ask? So that it's easy to compare with other years. Okay, so the formula for the inflation rate would be the CPI in a given year minus the CPI in the preceding means previous. So the new CPI in the current year minus the CPI in the previous year over the CPI in the previous year. That means the new figure minus the old figure over the old figure. It's just like maths when you want to come up with a percentage, right? Times the 100%, and that will give you your inflation rate. All right? Okay, so I'm going to give you an example now, all right, using the CPI. Suppose that the general prices in 2010 is higher than that of 2009. Okay, and just now I was talking about a basket of goods and services, right? So the economist would just use a basket of goods and services depending on what goods he thinks that consumers in Singapore spend more on. Alright, so let's say in Singapore, maybe we spend, let's say 10% of our income on SMRT, so he'll take that into account, right, when he calculates his basket of goods and services. Alright, maybe we spend 10% on clothes every month, okay, I don't know, maybe 20% on food. So all these things, the proportion of all these things, how much we spend on the various items like food, clothes, handphone, cars, and so on, will take up a proportion of a CPI. Okay? Now, so that's how we calculate this, the basket of goods and services, the CPI for a basket of goods and services. We give weightage to the different kinds of goods and services in that particular economy, all right? So you don't have to be aware of that now. Just take note that we give a weightage for each kind of good, depending on which country we are talking about, all right? So let's say that in the base year, as I said, the base year, let's say, is 2009. And remember, I told you just now that the base year, usually we give it a CPI of 100. Okay? So and let's say in 2010, the CPI is 110. All right? Based on the economist's calculation, it's 110. So what exactly is the inflation rate? The inflation rate will be equivalent to 110, the new figure, minus the old figure over the old figure times 100%. Okay? And how do we get these figures? They are actually the CPI. You use the Consumer Price Index to calculate the inflation rate, and that is how the inflation rate is measured. Alright? Okay? So 110 minus 100 over 100 times 100% would be 10%. Okay? Now, so I have finished going through question 2, how inflation rate is measured. I repeat, CPI, inflation rate, okay, and of course you consider the base year. Now number 3, what are the main causes that trigger the GPL to rise? Okay, you see, boys and girls, this is a short response question. Okay, and I've told you before that in the A levels there are no short response questions, right? So what we are doing here is basically for your understanding, but I thought that it would be more useful to show you how an essay question on the causes of inflation may look like. I repeat, I'm going to tweak question 3 to make it an essay question, which I'm going to use to go through with you now on the causes of inflation. Okay, I recap that for each of the macro goals or problems that you have to think of the causes, effects, and policies. And right now, I'm going to review the causes of inflation. Okay, now all these things, I expect you to write notes on whatever I'm saying right now. Okay, I said just now, I recap, I repeat, that the notes I expect for the next lesson, okay, based on this particular video, should be about 3 sides. Okay, 3-page sides. Okay, now I'm going to explain the possible causes of inflation for our country. Suppose that this is going to be out for your essay. Please copy the question. Okay, give me a moment. I'll just convert it. Alright, okay, now, if it's an essay question, alright, what you need to do in the introduction first is of course to define inflation. Okay, just define inflation about the sustained increase in the GPL, which you know about just now, and you state, boys and girls, state that the causes of inflation, you don't just think of the AD, you also think of the AS. Now, I recap that the causes of EG, do you remember, I've gone through this with you before, that the causes of EG is also the same thing. You need to consider both the AD as well as the AS. And if you only consider one side, you're going to get half the marks. Similarly, for causes of inflation, there are 2 sides. You need to show scope in your response. Okay? Demand pull, which is the AD side, aggregate demand. Cost push, which is the AS side. Okay? The supply, the aggregate supply, which is related to cost of production. Alright, now, everybody focus on demand pull inflation now. Okay? Don't look at the AS side. Okay? Alright, let's look at demand pull inflation. What is it? It is caused by an excessive rise in AD. That means, boys and girls, that means when AD increases, can you see that the GPL P0, AD increases from AD0 to AD1, can you see that the GPL will increase as well from P0 to P1? Okay, don't focus on the real national income side. Okay, of the axis. Don't focus on the real national income side of the axis, the horizontal axis. Focus on the vertical axis. And you can see that when AD increases from AD0 to AD1, okay, the GPL will increase from P0 to P1. The prices, the general price level actually increases, and that is what we call demand pull inflation, when it's caused by an increase in AD, excessive increase in AD. Alright? And the thing is that demand pull inflation can be caused by an increase in any component of AD. Okay? It can be because the C or I, G or X increased. Okay? Now, then just take note, okay, that this is an essay. I want to go back to the fact that this is an essay, right? Okay, the causes of inflation, I told you, you need to consider both AD and AS. And since it's a 10 marks question, give me 2 factors each. So you have 4 points in the entire essay. 2 factors, 2 factors. Okay? Do you remember that there are 4 steps when explaining the increase in AD, right? There are 4 steps. Okay? First step you need to tell me is to give me the factor that causes the component of AD to increase. So firstly, maybe you consider that there is a positive economic outlook. Do you remember this? Okay? Maybe there's a positive economic outlook. Consumers feel very confident, okay, that they are not going to lose their jobs. They are less fearful of getting retrenched. Okay, and therefore they're willing to spend more and their consumption increases. Now, I've gone through how positive economic outlook can also affect the level of investments as well. Do you remember that? Okay, and we said that with a positive economic outlook, it can increase the expected rate of returns on investments because investors increase their business confidence. Okay, you can take that down as well. Okay, because this can also affect the level of investments. Okay, so that is the first factor. All right. Now, the second factor that I can raise is that of a fall in interest rates. Okay, which can reduce the cost of borrowing. Take note of all these economic terms that I'm pointing out to you right now. Okay? And since the cost of borrowing falls, so as a consumer, I want to buy a car. And since the interest rates to borrow a loan to buy a car has fallen, it's more likely that I will buy the car. Right? So consumers are able to buy more big ticket items like cars. Okay, which also tend to be interest sensitive in nature. The C increases. Don't forget that a fall in interest rates can also affect the I. Okay? Now, please don't tell me that with a fall in interest rates, the MEI will fall. Alright? This is wrong. Please do not say that. The expected rate of returns on investments remains the same. With a fall in interest rates, it's just that the cost of borrowing for firms will fall. It will fall. It's cheaper for them to borrow. Okay, it's cheaper for them to borrow. So more investment projects with the expected rate of returns high enough to cover the lower cost of borrowing will increase. There will be more. There will be more projects where the expected rate of returns can cover the cost of borrowing, and therefore the investments increase. So take note that when there's a fall in interest rates, the MEI does not fall. Okay, next, what you do is you draw the graph and you show them, okay, that when AD increases from AD1 to AD2, what happens is that the GPL will increase from P1 to P2, and there will be demand pull inflation. All right? Okay? Now, then next, you should explain the graph. Now, what you do here is not exactly the same as iPony. It's a modified version. Okay, iPony links to real national income and economic growth, right? This links to GPL. So obviously, you need to make some changes. Okay? And take this down. All right? Take this down, please, and try to listen to my explanation. You are advised to stop the tape and write down if you need time to do so. Okay? Now, assume that AD increases within the intermediate range of the AS curve. Okay? It cannot be Keynesian. It has to be intermediate or classical. Here I choose intermediate. Because if it's Keynesian, the GPL will not increase. If AD increases within the Keynesian range of the AS curve, the GPL will not increase. Okay? So think about it. I'm going to explain now. When AD increases, okay, it's like the demand for many goods and services are increasing, right? It's increasing, okay, in general for many goods and services. What happens is that there will be a fall in the level of stock. Okay, because demand is increasing, right? So what happens is that the firms may need to draw down on some of their stock. Their stock will be reduced. Okay, right? They go to where they keep their stock and they start taking out some of their stock to sell because the demand has increased, right? So there'll be a fall in inventories, which is another word for stock. Now, what happens is that the firms, when they see that their stock levels drop, they'll be like, oh, we better increase production. If not, we have no more stock left. And so they will increase production. This is the P in iPony, right? Similar. Increase production and therefore their output will increase. Okay, if they increase production, it also means that they are producing more output, right? More goods. Okay, so if their output increases, okay, all right, consider that their output increases, there will be certain shortages. There might be certain shortages and supply bottlenecks in certain factors of production, for example, like labor. You know why? Because they are producing more. They're employing more labor. Okay, they're employing more labor. They're using up raw materials because they are producing more. And therefore, there might be shortages in various factors of production. And if there are shortages, okay, everyone is rushing for these limited raw materials. This is going to push up the production costs. And when the production cost increases, okay, what happens is that the firms may have to charge higher prices because now their costs are increasing, right? They may have to charge higher prices, and this is a situation where GPL increases. Okay, I was saying just now, GPL increase, demand pull inflation. And why do we call it demand pull inflation? Because it's the aggregate demand that increases. Okay, so it's very natural. Aggregate demand increases, we call it demand GPL increase, we call it demand pull inflation. All right, so make sure that you have all of these things down because it's not in your lecture notes. Okay, now on the other hand, boys and girls, can you look at this graph? Okay, you can also refer to the lecture notes to look at this graph because it's the same graph. You will see that in the intermediate range, yes, the GPL increases, but when AD increases further from AD2 to AD3, okay, you will see that the extent of the increase in GPL will be even greater because the AD is now increasing within the classical range of the AS curve. And you will see that because it's a vertical line, the extent of increase in the GPL is even greater. Alright? And so we go to the explanation here that when the economy is at full employment, when it is at the classical range of the AS curve, when the AD increases within the classical range of the AS curve, what happens is that the GPL increases by a very significant amount here, right? I put a star here, and therefore the demand pull inflation is made worse. It is made worse at full employment because all of the country's resources has been used up. Okay, it has been fully utilized and output cannot be further increased. Output cannot be further increased to meet new higher aggregate demand. It's a sad situation because, as you can see, it's only the GPL that increases and the real national income actually remains the same at YF. Okay, increasing the AD does nothing to increase your real national income. It only causes the GPL to increase from P2 to P3, and it's very sharp. It increases sharply. Alright, if any point in time you need to stop the video, you stop the video to copy down. Okay? Next, I'm going to go through the cost push inflation. Right? Cost push inflation. I go back to the question. What are the possible causes of inflation? You talk about the demand side. You also talk about the AS side. You talk about AD and AS. Now I'm going to the cost push inflation side, which is related to AS. Is that clear? Now, how come there might be cost push inflation? It is when the cost of production rises, and this is key. If you don't remember anything else, take note of the big points that I want to emphasize on, the important points, the big important things. One of them is that the cost of production rises. The cost of production rises, okay? Independently of the AD, right? Okay, for example, let's say, okay, so as I said just now, I'm sorry, you need to give two factors for AD and two factors for AS. Now I'm going through the first factor that may cause AS to fall. All right? Okay. The first one would be the increase in wages. Okay? So how come there might be an increase in wages? All right, for example, in developed countries, the trade unions might be very powerful. Okay, and when they are very powerful, they might be able to ask for large increases in wages without corresponding rises in productivity. That means the workers' productivity never increased, did not increase, but the trade unions are still asking for higher wages. Now, that means that the cost of production will increase, right? Because they're asking for such high wages. Okay? So, what happens is that the bosses may oblige because they think they can pass on the extra cost to the consumers. Okay? So, these higher prices, okay, so what happens is that the bosses pass on the higher cost to the consumers, and the consumers will be charged higher prices. But what happens is that when the workers see that there are higher prices in the economy, okay, they may ask the trade unions to increase their wages even further. I repeat, okay? So at first just now we were saying, right, that trade unions ask for a rise in wages, okay, here. But when there's a rise in wages, don't forget that prices may rise. Okay, this will cause prices to rise in the economy. But when the workers see that the prices in the economy are rising, workers may ask for even higher wages because they see the prices increasing. So they ask for even higher wages to maintain their purchasing power. Right? So what we get is a wage spiral. One group of workers obtains a wage increase, right? Wage increase, and then another group will follow, and it becomes a spiral. All right? And this may lead to hyperinflation. Okay? And this is the wage spiral. One group of workers ask, causing the prices. One group of workers ask for higher wages, causing the prices to increase. And when higher prices increase, okay, another group of workers may also ask, and that may cause wages in general to increase further. Okay, so this may lead to hyperinflation. And okay, now this line is absolutely essential. That is something that you must have in your analysis, in your work. All right. And there's a very high chance that you may have to write this in the A-levels. That when wage costs increase, this is going to cause the COP to increase, the profit margins of firms to fall, right? Why? Because when the costs increase, their profits will fall, right? And if the profits fall, ask yourself this simple question: when the profits of firms fall, do you think that they will want to supply more or supply less? Think for a while. When the profits of firms fall, do you think they will want to supply more or supply less? Okay? When the profits fall, generally firms will want to supply less. Supply less. They'll want to supply less, and therefore aggregate supply will fall. Okay? If your profits fall, you think it's not profitable anymore. You're willing to supply less. So aggregate supply in the economy will fall. Okay, and the curve will actually shift up. Okay, we'll talk about the shifting up later. I'll show it to you. All right. Okay, another factor, let me go through the other factor first. Okay, another factor why the COP, the cost of production, may increase is because of oil, increase in import prices such as oil. Okay, oil is an important factor of production. It is a very important raw material for many production processes. Okay, so when the price of oil increases, again the cost of production for firms will increase because it's a very important raw material that is used in many production processes, and the profit margins of the firms will fall. So I repeat my question. As a firm, if your profits fall, are you going to supply more or less? Your profits are falling. Definitely, you'll be willing to supply less, and therefore the aggregate supply curve will fall and it will shift up. Now, in your lecture notes, they say that it shifts left. Okay, I can accept the word shift left. But visually, when you look at the graph, which I'm going to show you now, it actually looks like it's shifting up. Okay, so if you're not comfortable with the usage of word shifting left, you just say that the AS curve shifts up. Can you see that it shifts up? It shifts up. Okay, not right or left, it shifts up. All right, when there is an increase in the COP. All right. Okay, so what happens is that I was saying that AS falls, aggregate supply falls, but visually the curve looks like it's shifting up. And what happens is that when you draw the graph, you see that you get P1, all right? Now, price level shifts to P2. It increases to P2. Okay, and if the aggregate supply curve falls and continues to shift up, then it will go up to P3. Okay, so there's an increase in GPL, that is cost push inflation. All right, so AS falls, there's an upward shift in the aggregate supply curve, and you will see that the GPL increases from P1 to P3. Please copy this graph down in the notes. Okay, when you write down the notes, I want to see the AD graph and the AS graph. It is absolutely essential that you have your ADAS analysis. All right? Okay? Okay, don't copy this part on the real national income. Just say that GPL increases and therefore there is cost push inflation. All right? I'm not going to elaborate on the rest because this is not the key. The key is that part. All right? The parts which are underlined. Okay? Now, so inflation, all right, these are the causes of inflation, the demand pull, as well as the cost push. Usually we have a hyphen here for demand pull and cost push, right? Demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. And don't forget that at the end of the essay, you need a conclusion, which you make a link to part B. So let's say if part B is on the policies to solve inflation in Singapore, let's say, all right, just make a link to the question of policies in part B, for example, all right? And so I would say, hey, inflation, there are many negative effects. Government may need to use policies. Just give a 1 or 2 lines conclusion to make a link to part B. And that is how you do a simple causes of inflation essay if it comes out in the examination. So, all right, and this is the end of the video. you should have at least 3 sides worth of writing. Please go back, okay, go back and add on if you do not have it. All right, thank you very much.